The only skill set that's an immediate green flag, no matter what marketer you are, is just like being customer centric. B2B marketing often requires more customer research and more nuance and complexity to sort of explain the differentiation. B2C marketing, the differentiation is often not necessarily product based.
Walk me through the skill set, because I think you as a fully fledged marketer, you need to know about copywriting, PPC, for example, social media, all this kind of stuff.
Everybody always talks about T-shaped marketer. So the T-shape would be a little bit about everything, but you go pretty deep in one area. I think you should, no matter where you decide to go deep in that T, you should have the customer top of mind. One of the biggest productivity killers for marketing teams is context switching back and forth between strategy and execution. I think LinkedIn also just gives more reach to people pages than company pages. Positioning and messaging, or the brand story in particular, is one of the most challenging things to master in marketing. I think you can evoke feelings in B2B, but I think it's like more centered in B2C, and in my opinion, a lot more creative.
Today we'll talk about B2B marketing, and you're the expert for this. So let's maybe start with your journey. Why did you end up becoming a marketer in the first place? What was your initial motivation? Maybe walk us through the process that made you become CMO of what company exactly?
CoLab Software.
Yeah. Walk us through that process.
Right out of college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had actually never worked in a business before. I was pre-med, and I, had done research and worked in nonprofits and things like that, but never caught that spark of something I really loved. So wanted to work in a business, joined a rotation program, figured, why don't I work in lots of different areas of business and see what sticks. So I joined this business called Helma, which is a FTSE 100 conglomerate of manufacturing companies. So they'll rotate you around different subsidiary companies that they have that are kind of mid-sized manufacturers, 200 to 500 employees. You work in manufacturing, you work in new product development, you work in marketing, sales, and certainly the marketing rotations were the most interesting. I felt like I made the biggest impact. I felt like my skills went the farthest there. So I kind of gravitated towards the marketing and product management side of the business, which in manufacturing companies, oftentimes those two things are kind of all part of one function. So kind of rose through the ranks at Helma over 6 years. My last role there was a VP role in charge of product and marketing at a fire system manufacturer. And then made the pivot to B2B SaaS about, probably 5 years ago. And so now I work for a vertical SaaS company in the design engineering space.
Yeah. How would you differentiate, maybe in your own terms, the comparison of B2B and B2C marketing? Is it more difficult? Is it more easy B2B marketing? How would you differentiate those two?
Personally, I think B2B marketing just comes more naturally to me. I think B2B marketing often requires more customer research and more nuance and complexity to sort of explain the differentiation, whereas B2C marketing, the differentiation is often not necessarily product-based, right? And so you have to create differentiation within a brand, and you have to evoke feelings, in a way that I think you can evoke feelings in B2B, but I think it's more centered in B2C. And I think it's a totally different skill set. And in my opinion, a lot more creative.
Yeah. Walk me through the skill set, because I think you as a fully fledged marketer, you need to know about copywriting, PPC, for example, social media, all this kind of stuff. How do you, for example, let's say you hire a marketer, what skill set are you looking for in a marketer?
Yeah, good question. So for me, the only skill set that's an immediate green flag, no matter what marketer you are, is just being customer centric. So we just hired a field marketer, for example, at Collab, and one of the things that was really evident throughout the process is that she loves at events and field marketing activations, building relationships with customers. And I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be top of mind for every field marketer. It's probably not in the job description, But that was great to see throughout the interview process. And even her references said something like, oh my God, customers love her, right? And so I think no matter what area of marketing you end up specializing in, everybody always talks about the T-shaped marketer who has a little bit of expertise in everything. You mentioned copywriting. I talked about field marketing. You've got demand gen, you've got messaging, positioning. So the T-shape would be, a little bit about everything, but you go pretty deep in one area. I think you should, no matter where you decide to go deep in that T, you should have the customer top of mind.
Yeah. How do you personally upskill yourself? So, for example, let's say you're lacking in a specific area, let's say, for example, copywriting or PPC. Would you just hire someone to do the job for you? So, actually, an expert who does the job for you? Or would you actually fill that gap of knowledge with courses, upskilling?
I think it has been very helpful for me throughout my career to, at least know somewhat how to execute everything. And I think that has to do with the size of company that I've been leading in. So, first team I was on, I was the only marketer. And then I led a team of like 2 or 3 people that grew to 5. And then I went back to 2 and grew that to 4 or 5. And then I went back to 2 again. And now my team is like 17 or something, including SDRs. So I think even today, like Series B CMO, I still do like 2 to 4 hours a day of my marketing work, right? And maybe sometimes it's like more cross-functional strategy work, but like it's work, it's not meetings. And so I think inevitably you got to, even at this stage, you got to still be a little bit scrappy, even in a C-level position. And so there's that piece of it, but there's also the piece of, if you understand to a certain extent how the cake is made, then you'll do a better job hiring, and you'll do a better job onboarding and enabling people to succeed in their role. After a certain point, it becomes impossible, right, to be great at everything. So you also do have to hire people who are great and hire people who are better than you in their functional area. But I do think upskilling and learning new things constantly plays an important role.
Yeah. How does a day of MJ look like as a CMO at CoLab?
Well, I am located like 3.5 hour time zone behind everybody else, so that probably plays a role in what my day looks like. But usually the morning is all of my meetings, all my one-to-ones, meetings with the leadership team. Occasionally I'll do like, I do a lot of training with the sales team and enablement on positioning, voice of the customer, things like that. So occasionally I'll have something like that. Occasionally I'll have something like an analyst briefing or like a case study call with the customer. And those usually happen all in the morning. And then the afternoons, I'll usually work on like a strategic project. So in April, May time of this year, we launched a brand refresh. We launched a new website. We announced our Series B. And so all of those were kind of projects that I was owning. I'll usually own like 1 or 2 projects a quarter. So like if you look at what my team works on every day, it's mostly project work, and my team will own like 5 or 10 projects a quarter. But I'll only own 1 or 2. And then the rest of my time, it's usually cross-functional stuff with the leadership team and then one-on-ones.
Okay. Sounds interesting. I think the first time we met MJ was through a Gen AI workshop of Insight Partners, if I remember correctly. My question is about like all these marketing tools that are emerging right now, like whether it's about AI, I don't know, the latest hottest shit for LinkedIn, whatever it might be. Do you feel like there's too much noise outside when it comes to marketing and sales tools? And how do you cut through the noise? How do you personally do it?
Personally, I don't feel like there's too much noise, but I think that's because I cut through the noise. And so I think it's tempting and easy to get overwhelmed and get pulled in too many directions at once. A couple of thoughts on how to cut through the noise. I do a very kind of rigorous, disciplined marketing planning process at the beginning of every quarter. And so my team hits the ground running on the first of the quarter with a plan. And I think that's really important because I actually think one of the biggest productivity killers for marketing teams is context switching back and forth between strategy and execution. And so we do all of our strategy kind of in the 1 month before the quarter starts. And then everybody goes heads down, executes the plan for most of the next quarter. And then again, the next quarter, we'll do planning for the following quarter at the end. And I think we just get a lot more done that way. And I think a lot of teams are looking at tools, looking at strategies that influencers are talking about on LinkedIn, and they're kind of like pinging around from one initiative to the next. without necessarily finishing what it is that they were working on before. And at the end of the day, I think, marketing is meaningless if you don't ship it and put it in front of a customer. And so committing to this like short and intense strategy planning period, and then really focusing on the execution and making sure you get everything out the door is one of the ways that I think our marketing team at CoLab is more productive than your typical team.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you also feel like sometimes people are looking for a shortcut where actually the shortcut would be not looking for a shortcut?
Yeah, I think, look, I have taken things and ideas from LinkedIn and technologies and implemented them, and it's been amazing, right? So you definitely can get a lot out of tuning into the trends, right, and trying to put them to work for you. But I think people underrate how difficult it is to apply a framework or launch a technology well in your business. And if you sort of put forward a half effort towards launching an initiative, you're not fully appreciating how challenging change management can be. And you're not going to capture the full value of that initiative. So I think it's important, back to your point, cut through the noise, but pick one or two things here or there and really invest in making it successful rather than trying to do everything at once.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering, from your point of view, MJ, how much is the distribution between actually executing the plan and leaving some room for marketing R&D, so experimentation? Is it like 80-20, 70-30? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I think there's a certain amount of experimentation built into the plan. So one of the things in the plan is for every campaign that we're going to run in a quarter, I ask people to give me an idea of how they're going to measure success. And there's kind of two categories of how you would measure success. And one of them is, this is a sort of mature and proven motion, in which case I'm looking for generally a quantitative lagging metric, right? So I want you to probably be measuring success in terms of stage 1 and stage 2 pipeline or revenue, right? And that's achievable for a mature proven motion because you have historical data that says in past quarters, 3-4 quarters of data that says we should land about here, right? But there's also room for, if you're standing up a motion that we have never tried before, then you can use more of a leading metric or more of a qualitative metric as your measure of success for a couple of quarters until you feel confident that, a pipeline target is a more realistic way to measure that motion. So there is some things in the plan, but I would call that like proactive experimentation. And then there's like the things that just come up in the middle of the quarter, which I think is less often experimentation. It's more often just reactive stuff, but actually that can have a lot of value. E.g., like sales keeps running into the same objection that you didn't plan to create collateral or messaging around, or sales keeps running into the same competitor or what have you. And sometimes you just got to slot that in, right? You just got to get that done because it is important, it's pressing, it's urgent. And I would say, I probably haven't fully mastered this yet, but the ideal situation would probably be to leave yourself like 15 or 20% capacity at the end of your planning just to respond to those reactive opportunities that are inevitably going to pop up in the course of executing your plan.
Yeah. Where have you learned the strategies from? Did you have mentors in the past that kind of taught you the strategies, or have you refined them yourself to be where you're at today?
Yeah, I've learned a ton from mentors. I invented a lot of the planning stuff myself, just because I have not had a ton of roles where I haven't had any roles where I haven't been the most senior marketer in the building, or I guess, hypothetically in the building if you're talking about CoLab, because it's a remote distributed team. And so I think I've learned a lot from mentors, especially on the leadership side and the business strategy side, because I've been reporting to CEOs for a while now. And then some stuff I pick up from people on LinkedIn. We've kind of talked about like how do you take the one or two ideas that make sense and resonate in your business and actually put that framework into practice thoughtfully. And then some stuff I just have made up. So made up the marketing planning process, tweaked it over time. And then another thing that we recently made up is our approach to competitive enablement for the sales team, which I'm really happy with as well.
Can you talk about this in a bit more detail on the podcast, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So CoLab is I think, a space that is really interesting, where there's a lot of activity going on, where maybe there hasn't been a ton of technology development in the last 15 years, but things are sort of heating up. Um, and for a while, we didn't have many competitors at all. I would say we still don't have a ton of direct competitors, but there are a couple. But we do have competition from other people trying to solve the same problem in a slightly different way. And, large companies and small companies. And CoLab has what I would consider to be an exceptional user experience. So for a really long time, the sales team was, trying to lean into this point of differentiation of it's easy to use, which I think is a great differentiator if people believe you. But I think every company on the planet says that they're easy to use or their product's easy to use. And so what we needed to do was create a form of competitive collateral that showed how it was easy to use, like show, not tell. And so we started with sort of use case based jobs to be done, particularly around design review, which is what CoLab focuses on. And we basically compared in 3 steps, like for all the different jobs to be done in a certain business process. How would you do this in CoLab? How would you do that in the competitive solution? And it really requires an in-depth understanding of the competitive solution. But then we built slide decks, slide by slide, and highlighted some of the kind of key ways in which CoLab is actually easier to use, right? So, if you're trying to perform this particular business process, here's how you do it in CoLab. Here's how you would have to do it in this other tool. And really exposing like what are the friction points that do not exist or that we've engineered out in CoLab that make CoLab a wonderful experience and easy to use. And it's, like I said, it requires really in-depth understanding of the tool that you're comparing against. If we could, we would get a license to the other tool to actually try to use it and demo it ourselves, because it requires that level of knowledge. And we actually internally named this type of competitive collateral the clinical dissection, because it's like that level of detail of understanding, feature by feature, capability by capability. So that is how we've been approaching competitive differentiation.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've seen it from other companies like Ghost, for example. So they are a website builder, open source website builder, and they do the same thing. So for example, they have dedicated landing pages on Ghost versus WordPress, Ghost versus whatever other website framework. So do you also then have landing pages on CoLab talking about the 2 different solutions that people might Google for, or is that an internal document?
It's a document in the sales process.
Got it.
We haven't done a ton with landing pages because I think unlike maybe a website builder or CMS or like a project management tool where the space is super competitive and like you need to be thinking about competition from the very top of your funnel. For us, generally, the competitive side-by-side tends to only happen late in the sales process. So just from the perspective of like, how should this information be packaged and circulated? The best way to package is a presentation, and the best way to circulate is via the sales team. So that's where we focused first. I think we certainly could use all of the same like messaging work and put it into a landing page. It's just not something we've done yet because it wasn't the most pressing area of need.
Got it. Yeah. How important is LinkedIn for you? Because I've been following you for quite some time, and you put out some very interesting posts when it comes to marketing, how you maybe structure your day, your marketing process. So how important is it for you, and what is your goal in doing that?
Yeah, so we have, I guess, 2 main personalities on LinkedIn. We've got Adam Keating, who's our CEO, and I work with him a little bit on his LinkedIn, and then like I use my LinkedIn. And we have 2 different goals for our 2 different profiles. So for me, it's mostly, in terms of the benefit to CoLab, it's mostly a recruiting play. So I write mostly about marketing. I write a little bit about sales dev these days because that team reports up to me too. And then I write about leadership. People follow me because they get a sense for, the things that I value in terms of marketing strategy and execution, but also like my leadership style. And a subset of those people think that I might be a good person to work for, right? Or CoLab might be a good company to work for. And so then when I do have a role, I can post that organically. I have 25,000 followers on the platform. And these days when I post a marketing role, or a sales development role, I'll probably get anywhere from 50 to 100 plus applications from people that found out about the job from my LinkedIn. And I would say generally that applicant pool is much more qualified for the position than just people who would find it through a paid LinkedIn posting or a paid posting on another job board. So that is definitely the main benefit for me. I've hired probably over half of the roles that we filled on my team from sourcing from my own LinkedIn, which is really great, especially if you're an exec. Adam's LinkedIn we use for generating sales opportunities for Collab. So Adam's LinkedIn is a lot more, he will share leadership stuff and stuff about Collab because we can recruit from his LinkedIn too, but he shares things that are like content relevant to our ICP that is really rooted in Collab's point of view. And he gets, anywhere from 5, 6 up to like 20% of qualified pipeline sourced from his LinkedIn each quarter.
Yeah, I see. I remember you had one post, I'm not sure how long ago it was, where you talked about how to incentivize your CEO to post on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So do you have some tips on how to actually do that? Maybe we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest obstacle for people when their CEO is not posting on LinkedIn is it's quite challenging to like be a writer, I think Paul Graham always says like good writing is the result of good thinking. Like the writing, well, sometimes the writing's the hard part, but the thinking is the hard part, I believe. And thinking in a way that translates naturally to writing. It's a skill, and it's also like something that some people enjoy doing and some people do not enjoy doing. And I would argue most people don't enjoy doing it. I actually quite enjoy doing it. So that's why you see me writing and posting in public all the time. Like the main reason is honestly not any particular business benefit, but just that I enjoy the process. Now, it's unlikely that your typical CEO is going to enjoy the process or be good at it, right? So you need to make the business benefit clear, but you also need to make the parts of it that are challenging for them easier. And I think every CEO is going to be a little bit different there, right? So for example, something that Adam really appreciates is when the marketing team provides him visuals, because to him, having a compelling visual is like the spark or the inspiration that he needs to write the copy. And he can basically write the copy from there. Now, other CEOs might want you to do some of the writing for them, and then sort of they can make tweaks and put it into their own voice. Like Adam would prefer that we don't write for him, but he really loves to have those visuals. So I think you need to work with your CEO to figure out what aspects of the content production they are comfortable with the marketing team taking on, and what aspects of the content production are most helpful for them to delegate to the marketing team so that it's not all on them all the time. I think if you're expecting too much out of your CEO, both in terms of the time commitment and the skills that they need to have to make it a successful motion, and you're just complaining that they're not doing it without picking up any of that slack yourself, I think that's kind of a motion that's going to be doomed to fail.
Yeah. Do you feel that there's more marketing became more people-centered in the sense of people actually look what the CEO is posting on LinkedIn and him or her becoming a thought leader rather than looking at what the company updates are? Do you feel like people are more inclined towards looking at the CEO, what they're posting?
I think so. I mean, I think LinkedIn also just gives more reach to people pages than company pages, but I think there's an element of people buy from people. And I think there's two components of that. They buy from people that they like, and they buy from people that have something interesting to say. And it's very challenging to be a company page that people like, right? I actually think it's an interesting phenomenon that you see on other social media platforms that you do not see yet on LinkedIn, where company pages actually act like people. And I think part of the reason that company pages speak like people on other platforms is to cultivate this feeling of like somebody I like, right? But especially on TikTok and Twitter, company pages will comment on people's posts as though they're a human being, right? And so I think that's part of the angle there. So you don't really see that company page behavior on LinkedIn, but it's an interesting difference between LinkedIn and other platforms in terms of how companies are using it. I think you see that behavior a lot with consumer brands as well. But if you're using a person's page like Adam's page, you have this opportunity to create not just the perception that you have something interesting to say and you can solve a problem, but also that you're just a good person to do business with. And I do think that those two things, when taken together, are very powerful for generating sales opportunities and good conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel the synergy between marketing and sales should look like? Because I've been working for some companies in the past where there is a detachment between different departments, especially between marketing and sales. So how important is it that marketing and sales, or customer success as well, and product, communicate with each other?
I think it's very important. I think we've got it down pretty well at CoLab. I would argue that it starts from the top. So if your marketing, sales, product, and CS leadership are aligned, then it's likely that the departments will be more aligned. And I think getting it right at the top stems from a couple of things. I think from the marketing perspective, you need to be proactive about solving problems in a way that is really going to help your counterparts in other departments. So one thing I've talked to our sales leader about is this idea of sales messaging versus marketing messaging. And she said, well, do you focus on sales messaging or do you just do marketing messaging? And I said, what's coming behind that question, right? Like, it's a strange question. Like, marketing messaging is sales messaging, right? And she was like, well, I don't know. Like, in the past, I've worked with people where the marketing messaging is like too high level, the customer demands another level of detail. Like, that messaging would just never work on a sales call. So we have to invent a whole separate category of sales messaging. And I said, well, we don't do that, right? Like, every piece of marketing messaging, you should master it well enough that you as a marketer could get on a sales call and like handle an objection, right? You should be able to train the sales team on how to handle certain situations that pop up in sales. But I think some marketing teams, like, they're not as proactive about like getting to that level of depth, because you're not, the fact of the matter is marketers aren't on sales calls every day. So in theory, you could get away with not having that level of marketing mastery or messaging mastery. But if you do that, you're going to create a vacuum where the sales team has to invent their own messaging, and then your messaging and their messaging is going to diverge. And so yes. I think to a certain point, like, it's about doing your job in a way that naturally lends itself to being leveraged by other departments, even if that makes your job a little harder. And then the second piece is just constructive conflict, right? So if marketing and sales disagree on something, the leadership has to be able to have constructive conflict together, which I think CoLab's leadership team is great at. And then you need to be able to cascade and communicate the decisions out to the team so that they can stay aligned as well.
Yeah. Is it then you who will be in sales calls with the sales team, or is it someone else from your team? How do you go about that?
It depends. For example, I talked about the competitive project earlier in the call. Our product marketing manager was the one who kind of led the charge on that. And we're at the point now where, we're telling the sales team, if you need the expert on a particular competitor, here's the competitors that our product marketing manager knows, like, at a clinical level. And so you can pull them into your call if you want, right? So we try to become experts in certain topics, e.g. competitive enablement within the marketing team. And if sales needs us to jump into a call, then we are happy to do that.
Yeah. When you work in technical marketing, do you feel it's easier to be a marketer and learn the technical bits, or being a technical person and learning the marketing bits? What would you say is more easy?
I think it depends on who you are. For me, let's see. I think there are parts of marketing that are easier to learn than the technical bits, but I think there are parts of marketing that are harder. And so I tell this story sometimes that the first CEO I ever worked for, it was during the rotation program. So I was looking at some different projects. There was something in manufacturing engineering, there's something in design engineering, there's something in marketing. And she said, I would encourage you not to choose the marketing project because it's too hard. And which was funny. Like, I ended up doing the manufacturing engineering project, and I didn't really understand what she meant by that. But like, years and years later, I sort of look back on that experience, and the marketing project that was likely posted, I don't remember what it was, but it was probably something about like the brand story or the company positioning or something of that nature, which would be an incredibly difficult project for somebody just starting out in their career to do. And so being able to distill what I would call basically all of the ideas in the entire company into sort of 5 or 6 core ideas and arrange those into a narrative and scale that across the organization so everyone tells the same story the same way. That is an aspect of marketing that I personally took, close to 10 years to master, right? So that's a part of marketing that I think is harder than any technical thing I've ever had to learn, right? But, the writing aspects, maybe like how do you write an SEO optimized blog post? Like those things, I think for me came quicker than, trying to master the subject matter. Well, not master, but understand the subject matter of structural engineering well enough that I can plug in some reasonable comments and do a CoLab demo. So, I would stack rank them differently, but I think you have to pull apart the different pieces of marketing and then pull apart the technical stuff and see how each compares to one another.
Yeah. Do you feel the foundational work, so positioning and messaging, is probably the most difficult exercise for a marketer because you have to really nail the foundation, right? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult for sure. I think because there are a lot of frameworks that are floating around for doing that kind of thing, but I think it's actually people underrate how difficult it is to use a framework well. And I think there is, and I hate to say this because I'm generally of the mindset that everything can be broken down into a science, but at a certain point, I do think there's a bit of art to storytelling. And I can describe it at least somewhat scientifically in terms of, storytelling is all about arranging the right ideas in the right order so you maximize the amount of sense that they make to people, or you maximize how easy it is to understand. But I do think there's a bit of an art to it where somebody who is kind of a master of storytelling can be developing a story or can hear a story and can sort of feel where there is still a gap in it, right? A logical gap in the story where it's not quite the right idea here, or these ideas are not quite presented in the right order, and you can just feel that something is off and that you are not done creating this story. And I think that is a feeling and a perception that it can actually take years and years to develop. And so to that extent, I would say positioning and messaging, or the brand story in particular, is one of the most challenging things to master in marketing.
Mm-hmm. How much time do you spend a week, maybe on a monthly basis, in terms of upskilling yourself? Do you read books? Do you take any courses online? How do you do it personally?
Yeah, I did a lot of that in my early/mid career. I don't know, maybe I'm still mid career, but like in the first kind of 6 or 7 years. And so I read a lot of books. I read a lot of content on LinkedIn. I didn't do as many courses. I think I was in a leadership development program, so I went on all the courses for that. But I don't take a ton of online courses these days. I don't do as much of it. And I do a lot, I learn by doing quite frequently. But I generally think that's probably a weakness of mine, where I don't seek out and ask for help often enough. So maybe I would not encourage people to replicate my way of doing things.
Yeah, I see. You also have your own course, if I'm not mistaken, right? What is this about?
It is about that marketing planning process that we talked about earlier in the call. So, like I said, I've been leading marketing teams for 5 or 6 years. And one of the things that you're going to be asked to do the first time you lead a department, or maybe even before that, is what's the marketing plan? And I think the first time I was asked to do that, I Googled, what are the different structures for marketing plans? Because, while I was certain that I could figure out how to make one, I wanted to avoid falling into any traps, or I wanted to, leverage, people who had done this before and see if they had great structures that I could just apply to circumvent some of the learning process. And all of this content that you find on the internet, very fluffy, very high level, wouldn't translate into a plan that is actually easy to execute for the team. And I think that's actually one of the biggest gaps, is that as a marketing leader, your job is to bridge the business level strategy being talked about at the executive leadership team, including how the company is positioned, and things like a SWOT analysis, which a lot of these, blog posts about marketing strategy will talk about. Okay, what's your SWOT analysis? and like, what are we actually doing day to day? And I feel like the bridge is the most difficult part. And so I developed my own process for this because I found really nothing super useful on the internet. And I've kind of tweaked it, refined it over 4 or 5 years of leading teams and making a lot of plans. And so I break down that process step by step. Course is about an hour long. But I think it solves for a gap that a lot of marketing leaders find themselves in when they start a new role.
Really cool. We'll put a link of that in the description as well so people can check it out. Only one last thing, probably we have to get Adam to the other podcast of mine, which is the Engineer Mind podcast. So you have to talk to him about that so we can make that happen. Sure anything else? Yeah, that would be cool. Any closing remarks from your side, MJ, to the audience?
No, I don't think so. But of course, I write about whatever it is I'm working on at the moment on LinkedIn. So maybe you'll start to hear more about couple of topics from me there. Competitive positioning. We spoke a little bit about it on this podcast. I think this is the first podcast I've spoken about that on. So there's some new content in here for people. And then I'm going to start probably talking about our approach to AI positioning and messaging on LinkedIn as well. So look out for that.
Yeah, that would have been actually my last question. How much do you use AI on a day-to-day basis and how much do you trust it?
I don't use it enough, I don't think. I'm sort of still like, incorporating generative AI into my workflow is something that I'm still like sort of uncomfortable with. I'll do a lot of stopping and starting, but it's something that I try to make myself do every so often because I know the more I do it, the more I build that muscle, the more it will come naturally to me. And for me, it's not really a matter of trusting it because my job as a marketing leader is to evaluate, work product. And so I can pretty easily evaluate whether I'm comfortable with the work product that the AI has produced or not. And so, I'll give it a shot. And I would say maybe 60% of the time, I'm glad that I used AI for the task versus just doing it myself from scratch. And I think as I get better at AI and I get a better sense for which tasks I should use AI for versus not, hopefully we can get that to 80 or 90%.
Yeah. Do you use it only for writing purposes, but also for maybe repurposing purposes, sales purposes? Like what different tools do you use? Maybe a couple of tools that you
I honestly just use ChatGPT, which is maybe, I haven't put that much thought into it. So it's also like one of the tools that my organization makes available off the shelf. We're pretty strict about security. So any tool that you're going to use has to be evaluated by the team. So I try to just use the ones that they've already evaluated. Usually I don't use it for a ton of long form content writing, but like the most recent example was writing all the session descriptions for our upcoming user conference. Like short couple of paragraphs. You can put a lot of guardrails in place for something like that. And I had a lot of information, like background information to feed into the AI. So I think things like that, things like, emails. I think AI, I think I did like a form when I was first creating that marketing course. Like, hey, fill out this form if you're interested. And I asked, what are you hoping to get out of this? I got 700 responses to it. And so I had AI summarize for me all of the responses, like what are the common themes that people are asking, because reading 700 responses would have taken forever. So things like that, where you can really put a lot of guardrails in place, have been for me the most useful applications of AI.
Really cool. MJ, thank you so much. Hopefully there will be a second part in the future. Let's see. But thanks so much for being on the show, and I'll put every relevant link down in the description.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Shoot it.